similarities are here, therefore homology. So that's circular reasoning. So I was making a different point to what you're saying.
Why did you raise homology at all? Because you're trying to make an argument of circularity.
No. The point I was trying to raise is this. The tree of life has hidden assumptions which people don't talk about.
Well, okay.
Do you concede that? That the tree of life...
Well, we weren't debating the tree of life. We were debating whether humans
No,
and chimps
but you just said to my friend right now, Faisal, that when he asked you about Darwinian evolution, you cast aside Darwinian evolution and you said you believe in common ancestry.
Correct.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the tree of life, right, which is based upon homology, would you agree?
It depends what you mean by based on.
Okay, do you believe in the tree of life? Okay, do you believe in the tree of life? Do you believe it's the right...
I believe we are related to other animals through common ancestry.
Universal common ancestry.
Well, it could be that there was more than one original thing.
So you believe in a pile of...
That's possible. I don't think that matters. For the debate that we were having, which is really about human...
Okay, so just on this tree,
right,
are there hidden assumptions with the tree of life?
Are there hidden assumptions? It depends, because what you mean by hidden
what are the assumptions made for the tree of life?
Hang on. The point I was making, right, was that the evidence for human-chimp common ancestry, right, is independent of whether you assume homology or not. You do not need to go in to the process that you take of assessing the evidence. You do not need to go into that assessment process with an assumption of homology. You could assume whatever you like. The evidence will force a conclusion on you.
So
right? And that is the point.
Okay.
This is the crucial point.
Okay.
Right? So if you look at that evidence, for example, the evidence I presented for the nano pseudo-G, right, is powerful evidence for evolution.
We had a 2-hour-long discussion on this. I disagree that there's assumptions. Okay?
So you did what, sorry?
I disagree that science is assumptionless.
You disagree that science has assumptions?
No. I disagree with the idea that you can come to the evidence without an assumption. You have to have the assumption of homology. And when it comes to the, when it comes to the tree of life, when it comes to the tree of life, have you heard of the origination probabilities and the transitional probabilities?
Have I heard of the origination probabilities? What do you mean, like the origination for the initial first common ancestor?
No, the origin of life.
The probability of it, yeah, I mean...
the
probability of the origin of life starting, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
I'm aware that there are discussions about that.
No, but are you aware of the distinction between origination probabilities and transition probabilities?
I haven't come familiar with those terms.
You've never come across those terms?
Not that I can recall. I mean, I might have read about them.
Those two assumptions are there in order for us to construct the tree of life. Okay?
Right, but we don't have
so, no, you have to, you have to.
We don't have to construct the whole tree of life to determine whether humans and chimps share a common ancestor.
But it's linked, because the humans and chimpanzees and blade of grass and elephants and everything. But let me explain this distinction. Origination probabilities, if you imagine a bead from 0 to 1, origination probabilities are close to 0. So we assume that life is very rare and it came about once. That's the assumption. And when it comes to transition probabilities, the bead goes from 0 to 1, close to 1. That there's a mechanism by which life transforms. Now, if we change these assumptions, we change the probability of the tree of life. And that's super important, because what you just said to my friend right now is actually false. What you actually said was that there's overwhelming evidence for common ancestry, but you never pointed out these hidden assumptions.
No, okay, because they don't matter.
No, right? Because you didn't know them.
No, but it doesn't
matter.
Different.
No, there's a difference.
It's not about me.
No,
right?
because you didn't know them.
You can read the paper in Nature.
Oh, no,
you don't need to make this about me.
No. But it is.
You just spoke. Let me
okay.
reply.
Sure.
Okay. You don't need to make this about me. You can read the paper in Nature that sequenced the human chimp. They did the sequence of the chimp genome, and they compared it to the human genome. And what that paper said was that the data overwhelmingly confirms the hypothesis of common ancestry.
And it still has those two assumptions I mentioned.
Now, the point
it still has the two assumptions I mentioned.
So hang on. Let's suppose you change the probability assumption of the origination, for example.
Yep.
Right. So
to close to 1, what happens?
Right,
what happens?
Well, you'd probably have more types of life. Right?
And what if it happens if transition probabilities become close to 0? common ancestry is dead.
Sorry, say again?
If the transition probabilities are close to
The
zero,
problem is,
okay, let me ask
you.
you.
You can, no, but hang on, Suboor. You can look at the way we assess things in science, right? This is universal in the scientific method, right? You have a hypothesis.
There is no universal scientific method.
All right, fair enough. But this, all right.
You know better than that. Come on,
okay,
you know
fair
better
enough.
than that.
This is how we generally assess scientific theories, right? They make predictions, precise predictions for data. Okay.
Using
right?
assumptions and theories they have.
No, but hang on. But you can validate those with the data. This
I
is the whole
agree.
point,
I
right?
agree.
So
I agree.
you agree that general relativity is validated by data, right? Why do you think that?
Because it confirms what the theory predicts.
Right. So it made a very precise prediction. For example.
But no one
Right.
denies that before looking at the data, you have an assumption, you have a theory.
Yeah,
Even-
but the question is not whether you have assumptions. The question is whether your conclusion has to rely on your starting assumptions. Because if that's true, then you have a circularity problem. However, if you get to a point where the data could either confirm or disconfirm your theory, right? Then that data, then you can say, well, if it keeps coming back consistent with the data, then you have overwhelming evidence. That's what overwhelming evidence
Yes, but that's
in the
still
scientific context looks like.
okay. But in this
right?
context, the origination probabilities and the transition probabilities are still there, and those assumptions they affect what the data is telling you.
No. Well, okay, so let's take an example, right? Let's take an example of the human. What I was talking to you.
Let's do transition.
Let's take the chromosome fusion.
Yeah.
Prediction, right? Well, no, let's take another one. Let's take the nano P8 pseudogene, right? If it must be the case, right? Would you agree? It must be the case that if evolution is true, that nano P8, right, is the youngest pseudogene, right?
Not necessarily.
Why would it not be the case?
Because if we begin off, because you said necessarily, and that's the word I disagree with. If we begin off with different probabilities, that will change the entire tree of life and all of the
but
things.
it doesn't
Do you
change-
agree with that?
It doesn't change. It has nothing to do.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's-
Here's
let-
what I think. Here's what I think.
let-
I
let-
think
let
if
me-
we look at this piece of data,
You know you're talking to that guy. What was his name? Chris.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you two different scenarios.
hang on, let me just make this point, Suboor. Sorry.
Okay.
So if you have, let's take the nano PA. So just to explain, obviously you're filming this, right? I need to explain what the case is, right? So you have this pseudogene called nano, right? And what nanoc has is a bunch of pseudogenes. So these are genes that have been disabled, right? Now, if you look at human nanoc pseudogenes and you compare them to chimp human nanoc genes, what you find is they've got the same sort of malfunction they've got the same pseudogenes basically. So they've got like the same error, right? That in itself is evidence for evolution because we think that
Is that
copying,
does that mean it's categorical?
Let me finish the argument, right? So, but it gets better than that because there's one pseudogene that is unique in humans and is not in chimps, okay? So, that nanoc pseudogene has to be the youngest one, right? So, if it wasn't, right, then you can't explain why, well, let's put it this way. If human-chimp common ancestry is true, you make the prediction that the one that humans only have, well, you couldn't have got them through common ancestry, right? So that must have evolved after the split, right? So not only must it be the youngest one, it must also be not just arbitrarily young, it must also be after the split. So if we think the split happened about 6 million years ago, then it must be, if it was the youngest one but it was 10 million years old, then evolution would be in trouble, right? If it's younger and it's less than 6 million years old, then that's confirmed, right? Disconfirming will be older and not the youngest. Lastly, right, we think that the Neanderthal split with humans I think it's about 2 million, I had all this data when we did our debate, so I don't know off the top of my head, but I think it's about 2 million years ago, right? The point is, whatever it was, right, if it's more recent than the nano-P date, right, then it should be the case that Neanderthals have the nano-P pseudogene, the nano-PA pseudogene, right? So you've got three things there that could either support the hypothesis of common ancestry, so it'd be confirming, or it could be disconfirming. So if nano-P8 was not the youngest, if it was before, if it was older than 6 million years, and if it's not in the Neanderthal genome, right? So you've got 3 independent tests there, right? Every single one came back in favour of the common ancestry hypothesis. So when you get many things piling up, right, and all coming back in favour of the hypothesis, that's what we call overwhelming evidence.
Why I would say with that, that's an incomplete picture. Because if we make the transition probability close to 0 and the origination probability close to 1, then the separate ancestry hypothesis will be stronger than common ancestry. Because the transition probability was going to be close to 0.
It doesn't matter.
It does matter, Phil.
I don't think it does.
Okay,
right?
Let me ask you this question. You gave this example. The transition probabilities being close to 0 would mean, that if we add the origination probabilities being close to 1, then you would get different implications on the data that you just highlighted.
No, but all you're doing is, right, so you're going like, you're trying to
We're
go
going
from origin of life and trying to move forward using these probabilities. But the data, you can go
Have you heard of Sober's paradox on this?
Sober's paradox? Yeah. I have to say.
If you did, then you would know about origination transition probabilities.
Okay. I did read Sober's book, but the point is,
Explain the paradox. Can you explain the paradox?
You can go, no, I don't recall it, as I said. Right.
Shall I?
But yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Fine, that's fine.
So look, when it comes to origination probabilities and transition probabilities, these two probabilities are linked. You cannot deny. You can't separate out the two. And the problem is, in most of our discourse, we don't talk about transition probabilities, we don't talk about origination probabilities. So the problem that currently exists is this. Whenever you're talking about the tree of life, the assumption is that the origination event was unique. That's the assumption.
You have to assume that it's unique. You certainly have to assume, well, you don't, I think that here's the point. The question of what was the probability for the first life to form is a very interesting question. But if we're looking at this pieces of evidence for human chimp common ancestry, we don't need to worry about what that probability
That's not true.
was.
That's
true.
No, that's not true.
No, it is true because the hypothesis makes particular predictions. Right. So let's suppose, right, you have. Yeah, well, let's say it was 1 in a billion chance of the first life form evolving, right? But now let's suppose you change it to 1 in 2 billion, right? Now, the
Why not?
prediction, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Well, no, it does matter. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example.
The prediction that you make for the NanoP8 pseudogene date will be unchanged.
No, it will not.
How would it change?
I'll tell you exactly how it
Tell
will
me
change.
how it would change.
If the transition probability is close to 0, and the origination probability is close to 1, then you can have multiple origins happening, almost an infinite type, and you can have parallel lines of evolution, and you can have the hypothesis of separate ancestry being stronger than common ancestry. So everything is dependent upon. It does matter. It does matter. Are you telling me that the origination probability and the transition probability doesn't change the downward stream predictions you're going to make? Of course it does.
No, I don't think it does because.
But you didn't hear about the origination and transition.
Again, you're making this about me. You look at the data. You look at the papers.
No, but if you don't know how the tree of life is constructed, how are we going to take your prediction seriously?
It's not because not my prediction, Suboor.
Yeah. So you should know the scientists are making these assumptions.
No. But the point is, those predictions don't change, right?
Even if you change the origination transition?
It doesn't matter because
I'll tell you why. I'll give you categorical evidence. I'll give you categorical evidence. Shall I give you a concrete example?
Let me just make this point, right? Okay. Let's put it this way, right? Let's suppose we wanted to know, right, if you and I shared the same grandparents. Okay. So let's suppose we want to know whether you and I were cousins, right? So all we need to find out is, do we have the same grandparents? Because if we're cousins, we must have the same grandparents, correct? Right? Now, if we change the origin of life probabilities, right, from 1 in a billion to 1 in 2 billion, does it change the fact that if we discover that we have the same grandparents, that you and I are cousins? Does that change?
I think that's that's a disanalogy.
No, that is exactly.
No,
that is exactly.
No.
Answer the question, Suboor. Does it? Would you agree?
It's a disanalogy.
All right, it may be a disanalogy.
No, it is a disanalogy. I'll explain why. I'll explain why.
Suboor, one thing at a time. Would you agree, though? We can debate whether it's analogous. We'll leave that for the moment, right? But would you agree that if we establish that we have the same grandparents, then we can conclude, independent of whatever the origin of life probability is, that we are cousins.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So
That's a
the
complete
point.
disanalogy,
No,
though.
but it is not
I'll explain why.
disanalogous.
Can I explain why?
Go ahead.
Okay. The origin of life,
Yeah, I got to
probability being close to 1,
Yeah.
would mean that there's multiple origins. So this analogy would not work, because in this analogy, there's only one origin.
No, there isn't only one origin.
So
There
you
could be-
basically
No, no, no.
concluded
No,
what you're supposed to be
no,
proving.
No, I'm not. Right. Okay.
Do you see why the disanalogy is there?
they're not
Okay,
disanalogous.
I'll
They're
explain
not-
why.
no,
I'll
no,
explain.
hang on, you did just
If
explain
we
why.
are
Let me
cousins
reply.
and if we have grandparents, then that can be confirmed through independent evidence. That's what you're basically saying.
I'm saying is, if we confirmed that we shared a grandparent,
Yeah.
then we must be cousins.
Right.
Right? Independent.
Do you not see the problem?
independent-
Do you
hang
not
on.
see how that's
No,
disanalogous to
but
the
hang on.
origination
No,
probabilities?
it's not. Okay.
But you never heard of the origination probabilities before we
again,
spoke
you're
about
making
them.
that about me. It's not about me.
No, because
all the papers in the
If
scientific
you don't know the
literature-
science, then
Right.
how can you make these predictions?
Right, because I didn't make them. That's the whole point of it. I didn't. Other
Okay.
people did.
Then
The
how,
peop- right?
how come?
No,
no,
hang on.
Okay, so
Let
I'll
me-
give
let
you
me
an
just-
example. I'll give you an example.
Well, let-
My,
let
okay,
me-
my friend here,
hang
just
on,
just come here for a
let me
second.
reply to your point.
When he explained to you the evidence for common ancestry, did he explain it in a way that's probabilistic or categorical? Overwhelming evidence.
That is
But
not
you
what
never,
I-
but you never told
no.
my friend about the origination
no,
and the
but
transition
because it
probabilities
doesn't matter.
because it does matter.
doesn't
Let me
matter.
explain to you why transition
Okay,
probabilities
hang
matter.
on, Suboor,
Let
you
me
made a
explain
point.
why.
Let me reply to it.
Have you heard of John Baptiste Lamarck and his
Suboor,
independent
Suboor,
evolutions?
Can I reply to your point?
Sure,
yes
sure.
Or no? Right? Because it seems to me that what you want to do, right, is say, have you heard of this? Have you heard of that? Have you heard of this?
Because you're not
Right?
learned on the
Because-
topic.
Because it doesn't matter about me. You're trying to
No,
make
but
this
you're
about
speaking
me.
about the topic, but you're not
no,
sure
no,
about
no.
it.
You look at the papers, right? You look at what the papers. Everyone should do this. Go and look up the chimp genome sequence paper, published by all of the major genome sequencing population, and you should see what their conclusion is. The conclusion is that the data overwhelmingly supports human-chimp common
Based on what
ancestry,
assumptions?
right?
Based on what
You can-
assumptions?
No, hang on. One thing at a time.
No,
One thing
based
at
on
a
what
time.
assumptions?
One thing at a time, Suboor.
No, I'm asking you, based on what assumptions?
One thing at a time, right? So that's
Go
what
on.
they're saying, right? So you want to make this about me, but it isn't
Okay,
about
but
me.
okay, fine.
But
fine.
it isn't about
It's
me.
about the paper.
Right.
It's about the paper.
It's about the data,
So,
right? No,
so
no, no,
what,
no. Let me reply
what
to
assumptions
your
are in the
point.
paper? What assumptions
Right.
are there for origination and transition? What are the assumptions?
I don't think it matters what the origin. That's the whole point.
It does? Can I-
right,
can
so
I-
no,
can I
so
tell
let
you-
me try and reply to your point about
No,
whether
no.
it
Let me
matters.
respond to this point. Let me respond to this point.
Okay, go on.
According to Darwin,
Yeah.
he believed the power of natural selection was to be able to transform anything into anything else. So according to him, the transition probability was close to 1. And according to Darwin, and according to Richard Dawkins and other biologists, they believe the origination probability is close to 0. However, if we change that, if we change the origination probability being close to 1 and the transition probability being close to 0, meaning transition,
Yeah,
you
but
can't
you don't-
transition,
okay.
we have different implications. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, something you said to my friend, is you made a distinction between common ancestry and the Darwinian mechanism, but these two are linked. If their mechanism breaks down, you cannot claim common ancestry.
I disagree. I
How?
disagree. Because, okay, let's suppose that there was some other mechanism, right? Well, in fact, there are other mechanisms, right? We know that we have natural selection, but we also have genetic drift, right? So, there could be other mechanisms, right? Maybe ones we don't know about. The fact is that if you have, let's put it this way, right? I could do a genetic test and find I'm descended from my parents, right? Confirm that my parents are who I think they are, right? But it wouldn't tell me whether it was sexual reproduction or IVF. There are two different mechanisms that I could have been born, but it doesn't matter. It's just irrelevant, right? The fact is, if the genetic test comes back and it says they are my parents, I don't need to know what the mechanism of how I got here is. It just doesn't matter, right? So, common ancestry is not. I agree that there's a relation between natural selection is the popular method of how evolution occurs, but it's not the only method. Certainly, there are others, right? And some people say sexual selection is a different mechanism to natural selection, right? But that doesn't matter, right? Because you can do genetic. If you take the example that I gave, right? if it's the case that humans and chimps share a common ancestry, right? You can have different assumptions about these things, but you are still going to predict that nano-PA must be in the Neanderthal genome, right?
Okay, so can I take what you're saying? Can I take what you're saying and change the variables?
Because we just have to go at 6
No, but last question.
Last question.
Look, last thing. If we change the transition probabilities and we change the origination probabilities and the mechanism itself, we say that it can't work. Say Darwinian evolution can't work. And the transition probability is close to 0 and the origination probability is close to 1. Then that means that separate ancestry makes a lot more sense than common ancestry under those assumptions.
Well, I would say that you're trying to go from these probabilities to common ancestry, right?
Oh,
what
separate
I'm
ancestry.
saying is that you can do these other tests, right, that are independent confirmation or disconfirmation, depending on what the data comes back as. And if the data comes back confirming, then you can just say that's enough. Right?
No, that's not.
Enough,
If you were saying that, I wouldn't have no problem. My problem is you think the origination and transition probabilities make no difference to your conclusions.
I'm saying that these tests, right? If you change, let's say, the origin of life probability,
and transition is 0.
Right, you would agree. You'd agree that in the case of your grandparent, it didn't matter. You would agreed on that.
I already explained to you why that was a disanalogy.
You think it's not analogous, but you would agreed on that, correct?
Of course, but that's a moot point.
Okay. Right, I'm saying it is analogous because just as you and I would be cousins if we had the same grandparents, right? So similarly, we and Neanderthals would share a common. Grandparent is just a common.
The point that you're supposed to prove, you've assumed. Because we're talking about the same species and two different species.
No, but that's not the case, right? If it was the case that what I just assumed is what I got as a conclusion, right? Then you would have this circular argument. I would agree with you. Right?
No, but frankly,
the point
I
is,
think you don't understand those probabilities. I'll explain to you why.
Again,
I'll ask you one question. There's one question.
Again, Suboor. You didn't let me finish your
Go
point.
on.
You didn't let me finish your point. And I did say this had to be the last point, right? Because I do have to go.
Fine.
Right. So this is going to be the last point, right?
Sure.
The point is that you can get data that would, independent of what those probabilities are.
That's not true.
Right? Give you confirmation or disconfirmation. If it were the case that humans and chimps were not descended from a common ancestor, right, then there's no reason to expect that the nano-PA is the youngest pseudogene. There's no reason to expect that it would be in the Neanderthal genome. There's no reason to expect that it would be dated at lower than the split between 6 million years.
I get it.
All three of those things
Okay.
came back.
Can I do a logical symmetry? Can I do a logical symmetry in what you're saying?
You can, and then I'm not going to reply.
Okay.
I have to go.
Similarities are due to common descent, right? Could we not make a logical symmetry argument that dissimilarities are due to separate ancestry, such as orphan genes?
It's
Logical symmetry.
We're not saying similarity. No, because we're not saying similarities will give us common sense. We're not saying that. That's not the argument.
What's the argument then?
I already gave the argument, and if you didn't follow it,
No, but
then that's your problem.
do you have
Suboor,
okay?
I have to go. I did say 6:00. I had to
Okay,
go.
okay, no
I
worries.
think it's now
No worries.
6:45 almost.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Cheers.
What he said to you before, and now the transition and origination probabilities.
Yeah.
Do you see the difference between the two now?
Completely lost confidence, innit? You know what's funny about it? He didn't address what he said. He didn't address the fact that the conclusions get changed by the assumptions.
Of course they do.
And if you change assumptions,
But you never heard of origination and transition probabilities.
I never heard of it either, but I understand the concept.
Yeah.
And he completely took it for granted. And even when he changed assumptions, he doesn't understand the change the data and the conclusion after.
It's just obvious.
You caught him at the end. He assumed his conclusion from the get-go.
Yeah.
So it was a complete disanalogy because we're the same species when we're talking about cousins
Yeah.
versus when we're talking about the split.
Terrible analogy.
So look, right in the beginning, the reason why I went and spoke to him is because Ali Dawah said he wants to talk to you.
He disregarded that as well.
And he disregarded that.
Yeah,
He
I know
disregarded
that
that.
too.
Where's Ali? I need to talk to Ali. So anyway, Jazak Allah Khair for joining in. It was good because you went in there to speak to him first. Your mic, he's gone on the mic.
Oh my god, he took the
Bro, Faisal, you did me a favor.
I know.
Because you went in there, you got him to talk, and I used that conversation. I said, why didn't you tell my friend that?
No,
Why did you only give him half the
You know what I
picture?
did when they were talking about probabilities? I said, if you think that's speculative, then evolution.
Yeah, I
No,
saw that.
I was like, you better pick up on that line. But you know, Skydivephil, someone as smart as him, yeah, does not understand the philosophy of science. He doesn't understand how the assumptions change the whole picture.
Bro, from the beginning, he didn't want to talk to me. He did not want to talk.
I couldn't believe how hard it was for him to accept that if you change the probabilities for transition, that it would
You know, so
create an
funny, you're talking about the actual concepts, the very important assumptions that change the whole picture. He's stuck in nuances.
Yeah.
He's talking about the
He always does
point
that,
this, a lot like, this is all relevant if this does not make sense.
Yeah.
And
That's all I was saying.
100%.
Because look, if the transition probabilities are close to zero, nothing can transform to anything else because there's no mechanism. If origination probabilities are close to 1, which is John Baptiste Lamarck believed, you'll have millions of origins, millions of independent lines of evolution.
just like the allegation hand waved that too.
Yeah.
If you don't look, it doesn't exist.
That's what human.
Whose mic is this?
Come on, brother, he's gone. Come on, man. He's gone.
Skydivephil's gone.